So I'd like to welcome you to this session called The Changing Landscape of Medical Literature. And I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, I think, for asking me to moderate this session, particularly Ilan and Dana. So thank you for that. And I'll tell you at the end whether I'm really pleased about that. So this is my usual slide. It's a slide showing the landscape of Melbourne. But this being the era of generative AI, it's compulsory now to use AI for your slide. So draw a graphic for ESPID conference in Copenhagen, plenary session on the changing landscape of medical literature, which has Professor Nigel Curtis moderating a discussion with 4 chief editors of prestigious medical journals. They're sitting on the sofa for the discussion, except for Professor Curtis, who is standing and trying to look calm under pressure. So here we are, immediately showing you the limitations of generative AI. Certainly in the spelling, I think probably some of our editors, they're good proofreaders, of course. You can also see that even though I said there were 4 speakers, we seem to have had 6. And also, if you look at me there, and that looks nothing like me, I seem to be relegated to the couch. So anyway, it does give me great pleasure to start this session and to introduce our speakers. Their bios are, of course, on the app, but just very briefly, we have Ines Steffens from Stockholm in Sweden, who is the chief editor of Eurosurveillance, published by CDC. We have Paul Sachs from Harvard Medical School in Boston, who is the chief editor of Clinical Infectious Diseases. Steve Black, University of Cincinnati in Ohio, who is the chief editor of our own journal, the ESPID journal. And finally, Eric Rubin, also from Harvard Medical School in Boston, the chief editor of, I've never heard of that journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. So publish or perish, we all know that that is the game in academic medicine. And what you probably don't know is that the first paper was in 1665. And I think we can all blame our troubles on Adrien Azout, who published the first paper with the really catchy title of Undertaking Studies and Labors of the Ingenious in Many Considerable Parts of the World. Agreed, a very catchy title. I think that's how it got published. Also, it was the first publication, 1665. And of course, where did the phrase publish or perish come from? I've put a lot of work into finding it out, and it was in this paper. It was actually a book about Archibald Carey-Coleridge in 1938. And certainly, since then, we have all published and perished. So since 1960, there have been 35 million publications on PubMed. These aren't all, obviously, all mine, but in total. And if you look on year by year, there's been this increase, and there's an exponential increase. And you can see that in 2019, 2021, there was a kind of a bonus, if we can call it that, from all the COVID publications. And even in 1 year, so just taking last year, there were 1,690,761 publications. So that explains why you're a bit behind with your reading. That's 4,632 a day, 193 an hour, 3.2 a minute, 1 publication every 19 seconds. And that's just in PubMed. And you may have seen this graphic showing the paper mountain, that if you took the first page of each publication in the year and you stacked it up, it would reach up to Kilimanjaro. But it makes the point that it's only the very top, very small proportion of papers that ever actually get cited, and even smaller number that get a large number of citations. So many of those papers, many of my papers, are only read by my mum. So I'm going to start this session off with just a quick fire set of questions. I'm going to ask you just to give me a yes, no, maybe answer. I will give you time later to give a bit of an explanation for your answers, so have your microphones ready. And the first question, so it's yes, no, maybe, and we're going to go with you, Ines, first. Are there too many articles published each year? Yes. So that was a yes. We need a mic, some mic action.
Yes. I don't think it's on.
This one's on.
No.
Maybe.
Okay, and even without asking, we have some audience participation, is that right? That's great. I was only going to ask one of these questions as an interactive, and I'll tell you when that is. And for those of you who don't already know how to do that, if you go to the session on your program, and then you go, there's a little button you press for interactive, And if you look on there, there'll be some questions. We'll be able to answer yes, no. But I think this is quite fun. We could do it as we could get the audience for each question as well. That was a bit unexpected. Okay, next question. So that was a yes, yes, no, maybe. Have we got the mics going now?
Not that one.
So we might have to just keep passing the mic around while someone plays with that one. Does impact factor matter? Ines?
Maybe.
Paul?
Maybe.
Steve?
Yes, but it shouldn't.
Eric?
Maybe, but it probably
Okay.
shouldn't either.
Okay, so we have a yes, maybe. We might quickly see if we can do an audience one quickly. So if you go, let's see if that works. I don't want to take too much time with that, but if it does work, we'll give it a go. Okay, 82% on yes. Next one. We'll keep these moving quickly. So we'll go back to the slides, please. Okay, next question. Is being first or last author very important, Ines?
Probably yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Steve?
No.
Eric?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, yes, no, yes. So we will do the audience one on that. I think that'd be quite interesting. Yep, next question. Go back to the slides, please. Is it okay to use ChatGPT or another large language model when preparing an article?
Yes, maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, we'll move straight to the next question. Is it okay to use ChatGPT or another large language model when reviewing an article?
Definitely no.
No. For sure, no.
Absolutely no.
Is the review process, the peer review process, fit for purpose? And I'm going to ask you to vote on this, so have a think about this, audience. Get to the interactive button on the session, which you can find from the program. So, Ines, is the peer review process fit for purpose?
Maybe.
Paul?
No. Yes.
Somewhere in the maybe yes category.
Okay. Back to the audience. We'll get the audience vote on that one, please. Divided. So 45% yes. Okay. Next question, please. Should reviewers be named rather than anonymous? Ines?
No.
Paul?
No.
Steve?
No.
I'm going to ask the audience this after we've heard from Eric.
Maybe.
Okay, audience, please. Okay, so about a third of people would like reviewers. I wonder if those are people writing or reviewing. Okay, back to the questions, please. Should we use preprint servers?
Maybe.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe.
Now, do you think there is a clear distinction between predatory journals and reputable journals?
Unfortunately not.
No. No.
Probably not. That's a maybe.
Okay. I'm going to keep moving for time. Should all journals be open access?
Yes.
No. Maybe.
No.
Okay. Will paper journals still exist in, say, 10 years' time?
Oh, yes, I think I said yes. Yes, I'd say yes.
No. I don't think they exist now. No.
No.
What about 25 years' time?
Journals? Maybe.
Paper journals.
Paper journals? No.
No.
Well, actually journals, sorry. Just journals in general. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd say maybe.
There'll be no paper left by then.
Yes.
Maybe.
And final question is Is there an article you regret having accepted for publication?
If it was just one, yes.
Yes.
Yes, apologies to the person in the audience, but yes.
Is that me, Steve?
Absolutely yes.
That's great. You'll be relieved to know that we're not going to spend an hour going through yes, no, etc. Now, I've actually been asking myself why I was asked to moderate this question, and I've realized that because I have something in common with these 4 people, and that's that they have each rejected at least one of the papers that I have submitted to them. And I now realize, in fact, why I was really persuaded to say yes, and that's because I now get the opportunity for revenge. Now, we have a very strict brief from the organizers. They want us to cover a broad range of topics, everything to do with publications, keep to time, and they've asked me to be provocative and not to let you off the hook. And I've also added my own kind of, which is to not diminish any chance of acceptance of any future papers in your journals. Okay, so obviously, each of our esteemed speakers could speak for at least an hour on every topic that we're going to talk about. But I've given them only a few minutes to respond to each question, and I'll give one speaker the opportunity to go first with a slightly longer response, and then very brief comments from the others. So please understand they could speak a lot longer on each topic, but I'm going to try and keep them to time. So we're going to start off with impact factor. And just in case anyone here doesn't realize what a journal's impact factor is simply the total number of times its articles were cited in the previous 2 years, divided by the total number of citable articles in the journal in that same period. And that is the journal impact factor. But I would highlight that journal impact factor is only one measure of a journal's success. And I think we'll start off with you, Steve. So what do you think about impact factor? There's lots of discussion about it amongst authors. Does it really matter anymore now that all journals are online? How much weight should we put on it when we're submitting a paper? And is it fair? Would any of you think perhaps is it gained sometimes by journals?
Okay, well, that's a lot to talk about in a couple of minutes, but this is one of my pet peeves, I think. I mean, you have to realize the impact factor was originally designed to assist research librarians in deciding which journals to order for their library if they had limited resources. It was not designed to evaluate researchers for promotion as it is used now. And in fact, a lot of people have recognized this now. There's now a DORA petition or Declaration of Research Assessment signed by more than 25,000 people requesting that impact factor not be used to evaluate investigators. So that's one piece. The other thing is that the impact factor, by its very nature, is malformed, because if you think about it in terms of evaluating a journal, you really want to know the number of times the journal was cited in a year, not divide that by the number of submissions. Because when you do that, it drives the journal editor to reject certain types of articles. For example, for PIDJ, if you're interested in having clinical cases presented, which many readers like, they're unlikely to be cited. But if you really are driving the decisions totally toward impact factor, you would basically reject all of those, which I'm against. And similarly, for new investigators, especially in lower and middle income countries who are just starting out, they would like to get published, and maybe those would get rejected as well. So that's a problem. I think if you just look at the number of citations per year, that's really what the impact is, regardless of what the denominator is. So, if I could change it, which I can't, I would do that. And I think, unfortunately, at the ESPID board meeting, some of the discussions were, and people are trying to get promoted, and the promotion committees, rather than looking at the quality of people's research, looks at the impact factor for the articles that they've submitted, which is unfortunate. So I think people are cheating, basically.
Excellent. Eric.
One way, we're a general medical journal, not a specialty journal, and one way we could guarantee to lower our impact factor would be to publish pediatric infectious disease papers, because it's a very small community, and the people who are going to cite those are other pediatric ID people for the most part. And so the impact factor pushes journals hopefully not ours, but it pushes journals to publish cardiology and oncology because those are the largest communities. So I don't think it serves medicine well at all.
Ines.
From a public health journal's perspective, I would also like to say that an impact factor, articles that may have an impact on policy making may not necessarily have the high number of citations. So there are other means also, if you want to judge on impact, there's really the impact through dissemination on social media, for which you have, for example, altmetrics, which can measure that. And there's Overton, which is a new tool whereby you can look into how far your article is being picked up at individual level in, for example, policy making or recommendations. And this is also something which potentially, together with the purely calculating metrics, you can use to really show what impact your published research has, in my view.
To see the limitations of impact factor, all you have to do is look at what happened to impact factors during COVID-19. Suddenly, people who published infectious disease papers saw their impact factors spike up, no pun intended. And I just say that really it was, those papers have very little durability. I mean, the joke I make is that they're like dairy products. They're on the shelf for a little while and then they spoil. No one should cite some of those early papers about COVID because they're irrelevant now. But it did boost the impact factor, although transiently, and now we're giving all that back. It's just a complete artifice of what happened in the publishing community.
Just one more comment. People cheat. I've had journals where I've submitted a manuscript, and they will say, your paper is basically acceptable for publication, but please cite at least two manuscripts from our journal and then send it back. So that's another problem. And the other way you could cheat, and most new journals start out this way, is by having very few articles. Because you can have an impact factor of 10 if you only publish one paper during the 2-year period and have your friend cite it 10 times, and then suddenly you have a high impact factor. So it's gameable as well.
Can I ask you, how much pressure are you under as chief editors to keep the impact factor up? I mean, do you have pressure from up above from the publishers each year to say, or each 2 years, to have increased your impact factor?
Well, every time I go to the ESPID board meetings to present on behalf of the journal, I get asked. And yes, when I presented this week, the tone had changed. I think people recognize now that this is not the be-all and end-all of evaluating the journal, but there's still people there who say, look, I can't get promoted until I submit a certain level of impact factor journal. So it's still a problem, but I think it's changing, is my assessment.
So in summary, we don't think it's a good idea. It's unfair. It can be gamed. Are there any better ways of doing it? You talked to Ines about altimetrics and other things. Do you think there are better any other ways that we can assess a journal?
I mean, does it really matter? Because, I mean, it used to be you would sit at home and wait for the journal to come in the mail. I don't know anybody who's doing that any longer. They look up the subject they're interested in PubMed or have automatic prompts, and it doesn't matter where it's published. If it's something you're interested in, it will show up.
For the younger members of the audience, mail is a thing we had where somebody would deliver a piece of paper to your house.
I still would like to highlight that it's good to look at various means of impact and at a basket of metrics and compare with others rather than using a single metric as a point value to compare and to also see how a development is. I mean, if you're up and down, then maybe this is not sensible for a journal, but if you're kind of steady in the middle ground, that's also important. And what is important, the impact is really by those who use the research, so not by a factor, it's by those who act on it, and that's probably what you can gain sometimes. Some people tell us when they go to a journal with a relatively lower impact factor, they deliberately choose to do that because they know their research is reaching those who they want to reach and act on. So that's maybe something to consider, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We're primarily clinical trials journal, and we'd love to measure impact by whether or not people actually act on what we do, but not an easy metric.
Okay, we're going to move on. Just remind everyone you can post questions on the app on your phone, and I'll be able to see them down here. Okay, we're going to move to authorship. So there was this very nice article in Science with a sentence that I really like that says, just like most aspects of academia, the order of authorship for a scientific paper is a bizarre combination of essential and arbitrary. And I know this really matters to my colleagues here because there was quite a lot of argument about the order that we're going to sit in, because this was seen as first author, middle authors, and last author. And I pointed out that all the chairs are actually the same. But they're not when it comes to papers. This is something that's a real problem for us all, deciding who goes on a paper in what order. This paper was famous for having over a dozen joint second authors. Now, I collect papers with multiple authors, and if you come across a paper with many, many authors, please let me know. And certainly the physics literature holds the record for these, and this used to be the record holder with 3,616 authors. And just about everybody is put on this paper, but they're in alphabetical order in the physics literature. In fact, everybody's on here, even me. And that was my figure. So that was a record holder until this came out with more than 5,000 authors, 5,154, and it does take a lot of people to get the most precise estimate of the mass of the Higgs boson. Now, you obviously all know what that is, and I've fished it out here. I tried to find out what it was because I thought it'd be a really good number to kind of use at dinner parties, but that's the answer. But that's been beaten just in the last couple of years by the infectious diseases community and by the COVID Surge and Global Surge Collaborative, who've now published a paper with over 15,000 authors. So, and the other thing that you might care about is where you are on the paper. And does it matter? Well, this paper, the conclusion was we found strong evidence for status bias. And what they did was they sent out to multiple reviewers the same paper, but just changed the authors. And they had either a low prominence author, an anonymized author, or a high prominence author, like a Nobel Prize winner. And as you can see by those in blue, your chance of being accepted, the same paper and the same reviewers, was influenced by who the authors were. Okay, so I'm going to turn now to talk about that. And Paul, I'm going to ask you first to have first go at this. So author order, it seems to matter to us. Does it matter to you? Do you think it matters? Do you notice who's first and last author? Do you take that into account when you're deciding what to accept?
So I'm going to take us back to when we learned about doing research, and one of the best teachers that I had when I was learning how to do research said, told me the essentials of the first and the last author. He said the first author is the person, who's basically responsible for moving the paper forward, writing the first draft, getting the team on board, submitting it, responding to the reviewers' comments. That first author role is really critical. And that's why I voted yes, does authorship matter? Because that first author really matters, and almost as important as the senior author, because that person is, of course, overseeing what the first author does, helps resolve any disputes that go on among the middle crowd, et cetera. So the essentials of it, I think, still work. And I would strongly advise people, and I will be doing so tomorrow at 7:30 if you happen to come to my session, to choose your authorship carefully. And that first author and that last author really matter. The jumble that's in the middle is a much harder issue to resolve, and that leads to some very funny slides like the ones you showed. I don't think that anyone here has a solution for that jumble in the middle, but the first and last still do matter.
Anybody else?
We occasionally, I'm sure all of us here, occasionally get into authorship disputes where someone raises issues saying I should have been third author instead of fourth author. I just want to point out, we really can't adjudicate those. We have no idea who did what. It's the author's responsibilities to resolve it themselves. So when you have an issue, the places you can go are the other authors, and if there's a serious issue, to their institution. The editors really can't do very much without all the authors' consent.
Ines.
I mean, people have proposed, and some journals do, omit the authorship list for the reviewers. And I think that's really gets rid of a lot of that bias of this is my buddy or whatever. It'd be interesting to compare, as the other study did, review papers that were sent out with the author list and without, to see how the reviewers responded.
To partially solve the problem of where someone is listed, which you definitely need to figure out before you start even writing a word, is to really apply the credit system, which has 14 authorship roles, and that is really clearly displaying who did what, because then afterwards you can come, even if you're somewhere in the middle, and you can show, well, I did the analysis, I did this, and I did that. So this is a helpful way forward, and I'm aware that some editors already discussed that they may give up on authorship generally on the principle and move forward towards contributorship, but there is no common agreement as yet, but there are some discussions all the time about how can we solve these problems, because I would say the majority of post-publication complaints we get are on the more serious ones are really on authorship disputes. This is where it all starts. Ownership, authorship, I did this and I own these data, that's often coupled.
I'm just going to echo what Eric said, and he stole one of my slides from tomorrow, which is basically that journals cannot adjudicate author order. That is completely in the investigator's responsibility, and it's work worth doing ahead of time. And another one of my teachers said, have those discussions early. Early. The earlier the better. So
it's interesting to hear that as editors you find the issue of authorship difficult, because certainly those of us who are submitting papers, this is a major problem, because there is only one or maybe two or sometimes 14 first or last authors. So there's a question here, which is actually what I was about to ask, which is why, and I've been asked to be provocative, you are the chief editors of 4 major journals. So why don't you just change it to say, from now on, authorship has to be in alphabetical order, and there is what somebody in the question here has called a, now move down the thing, a taxonomy of contribution. That just everybody says what they did, and somebody could be starred and said, this is the person who drove the project. You're the chief editors, why not change it so that we no longer have the problem of authorship order?
So I think there are 2 responses to that. One is Ines's comment about credit, which credit basically does that. It is a way of assigning responsibility to the authors. So there is a mechanism that some people use and some journals require. Actually, ours does not, but some require that. It's difficult as a journal, even a prominent journal, to unilaterally change something that's ingrained in all of research. And I wouldn't do it, honestly. However, there are journal consortia, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, for instance, that sets policies across journals, and where you're just changing a policy about making corrections in old articles, for example. And it's much easier to do it through those mechanisms. But honestly, I don't think that journals should be setting rules that constrain researchers. It has to be the community of researchers that decides what they want.
Okay, now we've got a community of researchers here, and I'm going to ask you a yes-no question. Would you prefer it if we managed to persuade whoever has the ability to do this, not here apparently, would you prefer it if we just had a list of authors in alphabetical order and there was just a very clear taxonomy of contribution? So yes if you think that, no if you prefer to keep things as they are. And then you can take this to the IJME. Okay, we'll show the result of that poll shortly.
Or not.
There we go. So, excellent. We might have influenced things. Okay.
Can I make one quick comment, Nigel? I think, that maybe most of the people are in the middle of the group and think they would do better alphabetically. I don't know, but I think for many first authors, especially for young investigators, if we had that policy, they might submit elsewhere because they want to be listed
I agree.
first.
Selection bias. All the first authors voted no. Okay, we're going to talk about ChatGPT and other large language models. There's been some very interesting papers recently trying to work out who is using ChatGPT for their writing their papers. This paper showed that there are certain words, you can see here, commendable, innovative, meticulous, are words that have suddenly increased, and these are words that are there's an over proportion of these words in ChatGPT generated text. This is shown here similarly. If you look at the bottom on the x-axis, the colors show each year from 2019 to 2023, and papers that contain the word intricate or meticulous or meticulously or commendable, which are all words used frequently by large language models, there's been this big jump, and this paper gives lots of other examples. And you can see that when they look at various different combinations of those, there has been this increase, whichever way you look at the use of these LLM-generated words. And it's been estimated using this data that 60,000 papers, which is only 1% of all articles, were generated by large language models last year. So a typical word that is used by ChatGPT is the word delve. If you get an email from anybody and it has the word delve in, they didn't write it. And if you look at the proportion of papers on PubMed with the word delve in, you can see that very obvious increase after the release of ChatGPT. This is another big clue. If your abstract contains, certainly, here is a possible introduction to your topic. Or if you've forgotten to remove the regenerate response when you copy and pasted what ChatGPT wrote. Regenerate response on a reference, which is slightly worrying. Probably not a real reference. Similarly here, I'm very sorry, but I don't have access to real-time information or patient-specific data, as I am an AI language model. So if you are going to use ChatGPT, be very careful with your copy and pasting. Okay, so who's going to take this one first? I think we'll let you go first, Eric. So how many papers in the New England Journal of Medicine this week were written by a large language model?
Well, yeah, so I don't know. Because, okay, our journal's a little bit different. I should be careful. But let me just go back to the using ChatGPT during the writing process, which to me is fine. It might generate a lot of junk like this. Ultimately, the words are your responsibility, not the responsibility of ChatGPT. So if you use an LLM, you A, should disclose the fact that you used it, and then B, check its work, because it will produce things like Nigel's showing us. But I do feel strongly about it, because for our journal, many of the, particularly pharmaceutical sponsored studies, are written by ghostwriters anyway. They have to be declared, but they're not written by the investigators. And also, investigators who don't speak English as a first language oftentimes hire translators. So why should they be paying $10,000 for a translator when they can use ChatGPT and it can do a pretty good job? Again, as long as they check their work. Now it's interesting, but the reason it doesn't so apply to us is that we have very heavy manuscript editing. Every sentence of every article you see is changed. The content's changed and the words are changed. None of the words that Nigel just used would make it through our manuscript editors, so you would never know that that the initial draft had been written by an LLM. I do want to get back, though, to the question another question you asked is about LLMs in the reviewing process. I can imagine that they could be a big help, but remember that the LLMs that you're using are very unlikely to be confidential, and confidentiality is really important to us. We really don't want to see someone's confidential manuscript show up in ChatGPT's database. So we don't allow it, and in fact, it is an ICMJ policy that reviewers cannot use it unless the journal specifically says it's okay.
Yeah, I would just say I don't think maybe 10 years from now I would trust it to do the review, but I think for many people who are submitting a paper, this is very important to them, and there's a high enough error rate in ChatGPT, and once it makes up its mind, the language goes totally negative or positive. So I think that the potential to really do a disservice to the authors is too high.
Just an observation, which is that the submitted papers from countries where English language is not commonly used, the quality of the writing has improved since these models became available, which really gets back to what Eric was saying. Previously, they had to hire a translator. Maybe they had a very bad translator or they didn't spend the money, and now they don't need to, and it is definitely better. But ultimately, they're responsible for the language, but it's an improvement.
I would still recommend to use it for certain aspects of the article when you write it, potentially for the introduction and the methods part when you use standard methods, because there's only as much that you can say about the background of a disease also. And but I think it's more difficult. The discussion should reflect your own thoughts, and it should reflect your own work, and also the results should be rather written by the authors themselves. And overall, I think I repeat here what you've said already, it's your responsibility. There needs to be human oversight. Without human oversight, this shouldn't work at all. And you need to be transparent, declare it where and why and what you used. And don't just use it to get your paper done within a day, which is certainly a problem now, because we will come back to predatory behaviors and others, and you will see that this is going to constitute a major issue in our future. I think it has potential to kill the system that we know as we do.
Yeah, just to expand on your point, Ines, there are, in research manuscripts where the rules are rather strict about what you can say, that is a very reasonable place to use ChatGPT. In opinion pieces and editorials, probably not the place to use it. You can use it to help you with the language, especially if your language skills are not great. But the ideas need to be yours.
Excellent. Well, a number of people here are very pleased that you've basically given permission to use large language models. I was going to ask, and perhaps a bit redundant now, whether you routinely use software to detect large language models, but it sounds like you don't care. Do you use it for, say, plagiarism? Do you run every article through software?
Yes. I would think
You all do?
We all
Okay.
do.
Good. Okay, we're going to move on to the peer review process. And I think I just have one self-explanatory slide for this. So I'm going to go to you first, Ines. I feel quite strongly about this, and you saw that 45% of the audience did not think that the peer review process was fit for purpose, and you all did. So I think you're the first person to defend the current process. And perhaps you could talk about difficulty of finding reviewers and how similar they are between, at least I know that reviewer 3 is pretty unpleasant. And who that is would be nice to know. But how much similarity is there in your journal between reviews?
Yeah. First of all, I have to say I'm a big fan of peer review, to be honest. However, with the caveat of that it needs to be done with the right mindset, respectfully, and also in the attempt to advance science and to understand that we're all tearing and pulling in the same direction, and that this is no means to put someone down in a way, even if their research isn't really good. So if we all consider this as the starting point, and you're doing this in your own time, and you're doing this as something to advance science, to improve the way publications are done, and I think it's quite important to understand that for each of the papers that you submit somewhere, it's payback time. You should at least review one article. I think that's the rule of thumb, which would keep our system as it is alive. But of course, there's a big bias in peer review, as we've seen already from the paper that was sent to a Nobel Prize winner or their co-worker, and how this alone, when the name was given, biases. Also in our journal, I mean, we see biases. We tend to be very conscious of our own biases and try to invite as many women and men, but of course we sometimes don't know if Kim is a woman or a man, and we don't always check this out to the very last detail. And so what we do then is we assign the reviews. We also try, I think what is more difficult is to avoid geographical bias in reviews. I don't know how this is for you. You tend to invite people who you have seen that they have researched in a certain field, and those who research less get less published, of course get less invited, but you need to make a real conscientious effort to stay away from that. What we did recently is we had a trainee who was looking into the composition of our peer reviews just in terms of sex, and we were really proud because she couldn't believe it, and we had a 50-50 male to female ratio in 2023, which is very good, we think. We also think there, in terms of peer review, there are some challenges, the other challenges that we need to overcome, which come along with questions of of who reviews, for example. We may have a bias in those who we think review, because often the senior researcher gets the invite and passes it on to his PhD, and the PhD does the work and the senior person gets the credit when we publish lists of reviewer names and things that we do. So in order to counteract this, we have started an initiative whereby we and other journals do that as well, invite senior researchers to twin with the junior researcher, and we invite both researchers then to submit a common review, and we hope that by this initiative there will be a sort of a knowledge transfer, a learning exercise, and also we will be able to give credit to those who really do the work.
I was one of the people who was a little unhappy with the reviewer process, and I just want to see if, show of hands, who in here has done a peer review for a research publication in the last 2 years? Raise your hand if you have. Okay. I just want to thank you, because you are donating your time to our journals and making them better, and I am enormously grateful. And that said, it pains me that we do not pay people for their time. I don't hold the purse strings in our publishers or our society's journal, but if I could, allocate some of the money that we make on the journal to pay reviewers today, I would do it. Because even, I believe, a nominal amount would in some way compensate for the significant amount of time that experts in our field take reviewing papers. And until that happens, I'm afraid it's a house of cards, and it will one day collapse.
Yeah, I think it's collapsing already. I mean, there's so many publications now that need peer review, and it used to be you'd invite 3 or 4 people and a couple would respond. Now we invite 10, 12 routinely. So I would fully agree. I think you mentioned predatory journals. I think there are a lot of predatory publishers who are just in it for the money and are loath to share those resources to adequately pay editors, but also especially reviewers. If you're asking someone who's an expert in the field to spend an hour of their time to review a paper, they should get something for that. It doesn't need to be a lot of money, but I think just having it be free without any recognition, without anything, is really unfair.
So I completely agree, and also salute all the people who do reviews. Our journal's a little different because it's very editor heavy. We have 10 full-time editors, we have 10 part-time, but editors who put a significant amount of time in. We have 4 part-time 5 professors of statistics. And when we review a paper, once the reviews come back from peer review, we all discuss that manuscript and make the decision jointly to proceed with publication. So it's really an editor's decision rather than a peer reviewer's decision, informed by the peer reviewers. And not surprisingly, we don't take everything that gets good peer reviews because we only publish a small number of articles every year. A little surprisingly, we take things all the time which have bad reviews. And that's because, again, which is unique to to a journal like ours, is usually people object to the fact that the conclusions are wrong, but we don't have any problem changing the conclusions. We do that routinely. So, so we can change the paper to get it into a form that would be more acceptable, I think.
I might add, so if we were going to incentivize with, there are different ways you could do that. You've talked about, I presume, a money incentive. What kind of amount are you thinking? $100, $200? Roughly. Just give me a number, 'cause I'm going to ask the audience if it would make a difference. Pick a number.
Can I share an anecdote? Am I allowed?
Well, I'd like you to think about whether it would make a difference, yes or no. Would it make a difference? Would you be more likely to review if there was a cash bonus of just... So,
$250.
US or Australian?
US.
I've been 250 US. Would it make a difference, yes or no? And you can, whilst they're voting,
I was thinking like a free Big Mac.
I got paid.
Wow, Big Macs are expensive in the US.
I had one journal, who I will go nameless, but begins with an L, paid me $250 to provide a review within a week. And, you could We could argue whether that's the right amount or not, but it was an incentive to complete the review in a timely manner.
Okay, so would $250 make you more likely to review and perhaps more timely as well? We'll look at the result of that.
While you're typing, can I make the case for another way of incentivizing peer review?
Okay.
Does it say yes?
90% yes, 250.
Oh God,
They're
okay,
a cheap
okay.
bunch.
I mean, just imagine how I mean, you're just one person, but imagine we need papers for which we need sometimes 3 to 5 reviewers, right? So imagine the additional costs on the system. That's one way. And the bias that this will introduce, because some people may happily say, hi, here I am, even though they don't have the right expertise, and they just want the money maybe, and have ChatGPT writing this in 5 minutes. So I'm sorry, I'm a public health journalist, so I would take another position, obviously.
I'm just calculating how many I'd have to do a day to be able to retire on that.
I could see you doing that, and that's what I think the concern is. You'd like to have people review because they're interested in the topic and have the expertise. So I think probably I would say $250 is too much. Okay. 25 or 50, I think, would not motivate people to say, I'm going to retire now and be a full-time reviewer.
Not quite. I'm going to just move us on, but the quick question I'd like to ask is how often does an appeal work when you don't like the review? So if I write you saying, you know, I don't agree with these reviews, how often would that work in your journal, just very roughly? Is that unusual for an appeal against the reviewer's comments to work?
No, it's not unusual.
Not unusual and almost never works.
Yeah. Oh, it's not unusual to receive, Steve, and does it work? No. Okay, not unusual, doesn't work.
There are individual circumstances where, because the field of ID is so small, where someone, after a review occurs, points out that there are people who strongly disagree with their research work, and they believe that one of those reviewers did the review. And so what we do is we seek out an additional review under those circumstances. Most of the time, the rejection stands, but there have been a few cases where it has been reversed.
And they're almost always wrong about who the reviewer was. Almost invariably, they say, I know this review came from Dr. X, and Dr. X disagrees with me, and it's one of their colleagues who wrote the review.
Okay. I'm just going to very briefly read some of these comments. I can't go through each of them, but someone's saying, why don't we anonymize the authors for peer review, which would seem to make sense. Would you be broadly in agreement with that, anonymizing the authors? Can we up incentivize? We've talked about that. And why don't we acknowledge reviewing papers for academic promotion? I think a lot of institutions do actually do that. You should include that in your CV and academic promotion submission. The journal happily charges £3,000, that's from someone in the UK, for publishing the article. Is it unreasonable to pay reviewers out of this? No. No? And yes, this was another good question, which is, quite often you're asked to find your own reviewers, so you have to submit 4 or 5. So why is that okay? To me, that seems really not okay, because I usually ask my wife, my son, my friend.
Well, at least at max, we take one of the recommended reviewers, but we would always pair them up. And the reason is because in the early days, we had a series of reviews that we had commissioned, and all these came along with a long list of peer reviewer names, and we realized at one point that these peer reviewers were always positive, whereas the ones that we had chosen were not quite as positive, so we decided to change our policy as we went along.
You know, you'd be surprised who your friends are, because a lot of the people who submit and recommend reviewers, they come back with a very negative review.
That has been our experience as well. Some of the suggested reviewers turn out to be very critical.
Yeah, I think that's our experience as well. We sometimes select opposed reviewers too, always making sure we're pairing them with someone. But it's useful if the opposed reviewer is the biggest person in the field. It's very hard to exclude that person. You can read their review with the fact that they were opposed in mind, but still want to hear what they have to say.
Okay, so sometimes the review you suggest is adverse. I am going to stop suggesting my wife. Okay, preprint servers we're going to come to now. And I was finding a graphic for this, and I was aware of some of these preprint servers, but I had no idea that there's a proliferation of preprint servers. This is just another graphic, and there are many others, multiple preprint servers. So I think many of us, when we have some fantastic results from a trial or from lab results, are reluctant to put them on a preprint server because you feel you're now releasing them, and now will a reputable journal accept my paper because it's already been semi-published? So we'd be very keen to hear your view on this. Perhaps start with Eric.
I think there are places for preprint servers and places where there may not be as appropriate. I'm a basic scientist, and we post almost all of our work on preprint servers. We published something this past week, and it had been on a preprint server a year or more before, and it took that long to actually figure out how to get it published. But the difference between what my lab does and what we publish in the New England Journal is that when I publish something, first off, only like 6 other people read it. And secondly, if it's wrong, no one dies. But we very frequently, almost always, at least change the conclusions of a study somewhat, and sometimes change them to the opposite. And having a preprint out there where the authors, and I understand authors are enthusiastic about their work. It's not just about money, it's not just about patent rights, but it's also people believe in what they do. Academic authors believe in what they do, and they tend to write in a way that gives the best positive possible message out of what they're doing. But we won't allow that. We change that. And remember that our readers are doctors, many of whom are not researchers, many of whom don't have the tools to analyze the results themselves. So we don't discriminate against people who put things on preprint servers, but I'm not sure they're serving patients ultimately the best way if there are now 2 versions of the conclusions out there, one published one and one preprint one. I don't know the solution for that. Researchers have to do what they have to do. I will say that most of what we published hasn't been on preprint servers, but that we don't take that into account.
Yeah, I would just say you were using maybe or depends a lot in our initial questionnaire, and I think here it depends. I think if you look back at COVID, where no one knew about the contagion, the transmission, or whatever, and the field was evolving so quickly, that's where I think the preprint servers actually did a tremendous amount of good. If this is just an incremental change in the field, why put it there? Why not just finish it and put it in a polished manner in a publication?
I have a question for the community. I don't really understand. Usually when there's a proliferation of sites like this, there's some, monetary value to the fact that these sites exist, and I don't know where the revenue stream comes from for these sites to proliferate. Why do so many exist?
Well, if I can answer that.
Yes, please.
There are 2 different categories. Some of them are just field specific and they found a funder to support them. Others are coming from commercial publishers, and their job is to capture those manuscripts so that they can publish them in their own journals. And they offer incentives to authors to do so.
Because one of the most prominent, which is bioRxiv, which, by the way, I didn't know how to pronounce until way after I had seen it written 1,000,000 times. But bioRxiv was started by a very reputable research cardiologist at Yale, and I don't think he's.
Nope.
I don't think he's getting any money.
And the same is
for
true
it.
of medRxiv. But I want to add one thing, which is what's very different about our field, and it gets back to the reviewer question than from some other fields. The grandfather of all of these is archive, which is a largely physics preprint server. If you post something on archive, it will sit there for a couple of years. It will accumulate many, many comments, which are essentially open peer review. And the published manuscript then benefits from all of the commentary that people have gotten. When things get posted on medRxiv or bioRxiv, there are almost no comments. And there's no real exchange. Occasionally we have had people call us up and said, you did this wrong. And it has been helpful, but it doesn't have the same power that it does in physics.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to predatory journals. And there has been, as you will all know from the emails that you open each day saying, greetings, which is usually the clue. The other clue is there is a mixture of italic and non-italic writing, and the italic is usually in a very lurid green. So the growth, you'll all know, big recent increase, exponential in fact. I think everybody knows that I don't like surveys. But this particular survey does tell us one interesting thing, which is that in this particular survey, 8% of people who had published weren't sure when they were asked if they had ever published in a predatory journal, because they weren't sure what one was and how you would know what one was. And the point was made in this Nature article that it's very difficult to actually now know what's a predatory journal and what isn't. And there are various different ways of looking at it. There's Beale's list and Kebble's list, etc. And they don't intersect. And this same publication made the same report, made the point that really there's a spectrum. But this is, of course, a major problem for us all. And I think, Ines, I'm going to ask you to start with this. So what's your view on predatory journals, and how do we avoid publishing them, or should we avoid publishing them? Another poll question here said that, what's the problem? And some people said no problem.
Big problem. So while most of us associate the term predatory journals with the person who's coined it, Jeffrey Beale, his list ceased to exist in 2017, which is very important because many people, when they look for predatory journals, still look at the Beale's list. And of course, you won't find a lot of the journals that have been set up since 2017 on the list. And also, if you look at the white lists and the negative lists, as you've seen on the graph that Nigel showed, there's no single definition and no list rules at all. So the Venn diagrams don't show 100% overlap. So the thing is that how do we counter this? There was this report which Nigel mentioned, and there's also been in 2019 an initiative by scholars and editors and publishers to come up with a common definition. And I guess you all know what some of the main features are. The features are self-interest, monetary interest on the expense of scholarly publishing. Then other features that are important are no editorial oversight, simply lies, I would say, with bogus non-existing impact factors, what have I forgotten, no transparency, and pretty aggressive solicitation of article behaviors. But all of these behaviors, on the very extreme end, we recognize them, but you don't recognize them in the spectrum, because there may be low-quality journals which have, or journals who are just starting. Of course, they don't have any impact factor, and you may want to look them up in PubMed, or you want to look them up in Directory of Open Access Journals, and you won't find them. So that's a bit of a tricky position to be in. So I think if you want to avoid a predatory journal, which you should do at any case, please look at Think, Check, Submit, which is a tool which helps you spot them, and also talk to your peers, discuss it with your librarian, with an editor, and then you will be suspicious from the beginning, because some of them really, they're hijacked journals, they're journals that look exactly like a reputable journal. And this is also a danger, is because you end up with journals that you all know and that you're familiar with, that they get all the share of the market just because you start mistrusting everyone who comes newly to the field, and that's a bit tricky, or you haven't heard of before. So yes, definitely something to avoid, I would say, because if you want to look at the share of the market just in 2020 alone, there have been, that's the figure that I found, nearly $180,000 US been revenues from predatory publishing. And when Cabell predatory reports started in 2017, they had 4,000 journals on their list, and the last figure that I've seen was around 16,000. So that was recently, so 4 times. There's a lot of money, and there's of course the incentive of publish or perish. And it's important to also understand that this is not a problem of people in low and middle income countries, but you find this everywhere. And we even had colleagues who fell into the trap of a predatory journal, and by the time you've signed, they've published, you don't get your article back.
Oh.
I think that we all could agree that the genesis of the predatory publications is the business model for open access publishing, which is the only way that they could survive, because they charge open access or article processing fees. There's almost no peer review, And what makes it difficult, as Ines said, is that some of them have so cleverly, they've gotten themselves listed on PubMed, so that doesn't work. You can't check there. They've developed an impact factor system, which sometimes uses some of the tricks that Steve mentioned. And there they are. Someone showed me recently the top 10 ID journals for impact factor, and I kid you not, several of them were what we would consider predatory journals. I had never heard of them before. It was a complete shock.
Yeah, I think this arises out of the predatory publisher model where, like everything else in the world today, what used to be an academic area has now become an area of revenue. The Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal was, when George McCracken founded it, was initially published by the Textbook Publishing Company, which was a nonprofit entity. But then that got bought out and is now bought out again, and now the publisher is very much interested in the bottom line, and I have to say not so much in the science. So that part of this arises out of, as you said, out of the high open access fees, and despite efforts by eLife and other nonprofit entities to sort of crack this model, we're still being victimized by it.
Apparently, well, last month there was an article in the journal Science related to this that said that some authors are now paying editors to accept articles. I think this is really reprehensible, but if people are interested, we're all around.
Subliminal hint taken. Now, one way of knowing that a journal is predatory is if the chief editor is a dog. And this dog in Australia is the chief editor of 7 predatory journals. And his research interests include the benefits of abdominal massage for medium-sized canines and the role of domestic canines in promoting optimal mental health in aging males. And applications with those inclusions is what made this dog a journal editor. And one of them is the Global Journal of Addiction and Rehabilitation Medicine, something I publish in regularly. Now, this paper is by me. It's crushed Betholia excelsa for the prevention of glossophobia during COVID-19, a novel approach. And I've had this accepted by a predatory journal. It's Betholia excelsa is walnut. And it's by Anonymous, Be Reasonable, See You Next Tuesday, Derail, Eat More Nuts, Fake Name, and N. Curtis. Glossophobia has seen a notable increase during COVID-19 attributable to heightened anxiety and reduced social interaction, while Betholia excelsa is rich in nutrients like selenium, which are believed to have effects on mental health. A total of 3.14159, that's pi, individuals with mild to moderate glossophobia were enrolled in a 12-week randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. Participants were divided into 2 groups, one taking a daily supplement of aforesaid Betholia and the other a placebo cup of Earl Grey tea. Glossophobia severity was assessed using the Glossophobia Fear Scale and Overall Anxiety Severity and Impairment Scale, OASIS, at baseline 6 weeks and 12 weeks. Initial findings indicate a statistically significant decrease in glossophobia symptoms in the group receiving the intervention, with notable improvements in all measures, with the important p less than 0.05, which I did put in bold in all of my submissions. No significant changes were observed in the placebo group other than diminished situs being thirst, because they were in the Earl Grey tea group. And obviously, I ended by saying additional studies are needed to fully understand the mechanisms and long-term effects of this invention with some keywords. This has been accepted. I got as far as the $4,000 article publishing fee, and at that point, I didn't proceed.
I'd like to delve into those results a bit further, if I could.
Well, you'll be seeing them soon, because I'm submitting them to CID. We're going to move to open access. Lots of different examples of open access, which I've listed there. So there are non-profit publishers who have open access journals, such as PLOS, commercial publishers who have open access journals, such as Elsevier and Springer Nature, and those that are exclusively open access by commercial publishers, such as Frontiers and MDPI, etc. So in terms of open access, Steve, perhaps you'd like to talk about open access, because I think we have a mixture in PIDJ.
Yeah, and on the face of it, if the publishers weren't making so much money on this and the fees were reasonable, you could say this would be a reasonable way to go, unless you live in a lower middle income country, in which case it basically locks you out of publishing your research. So I think, for example, for the eLife model, which is a nonprofit entity, they will exempt you from the open access fee if you can demonstrate that you can't pay it. So in that regard, I think it makes sense. The way we're doing it now, where people have to come up with $3,000 or $4,000 to publish their article, or if you're lucky enough to be doing studies funded by the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates will pay that amount, is problematic. And I would support it if the fees were reasonable and didn't engender a large profit. I think the publisher that I work with is very interested in moving into this area because they think the profits are higher, and shouldn't be the motivation.
Somebody here has, we've triggered a lot of people with this fee for reviewing. Someone's pointed out that the academic journal industry is worth $20 billion with a B dollars a year. And
Yeah, but
surely there's enough money in there to pay reviewers and to reduce fees for publishing.
But be careful about the academic publishing industry. The academic publishing industry, 19 and a half of those $1 billion are in a couple of major commercial publishers. I think there are good arguments for open access, and Steve made some of them. It's very difficult for scholarly societies, though. It's very difficult because open access is a volume model. Either someone is paying for it, like eLife, which is externally funded, or PLOS, or they have to publish as many papers as they can. And it's not consistent with the model of a scholarly society. So it's been very difficult. On top of that, journals used to fund a lot of scholarly societies. They were the major income stream, and that is kind of drying up.
One other group that really suffers from the model is the junior investigators who don't have grants yet. And you know, occasionally I was in the position when I was the editor of Open Forum Infectious Disease of a junior investigator had submitted a paper, and they had a senior author on it that I knew had grant funding, and yet the investigator didn't know that they should ask the senior author who had the grant funding that could pay the open access fee. So they basically said, I've gone this far, it's been reviewed and accepted, and now what do I do? I don't have the money. I mean, the whole process is very disquieting. It is, yes, I think that there is a path forward with open access. I just think that some of the fees are extortionist. And you mentioned $3,000, $4,000, but some of the more prestigious basic science journals are twice that, 3 times that, even more. It's extremely high.
And that 3 times that, at those highly intensively edited journals, they're not actually that's not enough to pay for their costs.
From our perspective, maybe we're a diamond open access journal, whereby the European taxpayer via the European Union and the ECDC pays for the journal. This is a model which, of course, helps to circumvent a lot of the problems that you have. We don't, and it gives us also in the US you have EID, but you have the Emerging Infectious Diseases, which is published by the US CDC, and we're in a similar role. We consider ourselves as friends and complementary rather than competitors. So these type of journals provide exactly what others see as a hindrance. We don't pay. We provide intense editing services, and based on the model that we have, we can even support authors that may have more problems to find a space because of their knowledge and skills. Even though they may have good data, we can even support them from time to time to publish in our journals. So there are ways out there. I understand they're very complex, and they may not be for the benefit of scholarly societies or learned societies when they publish their journals. But there are, with the funding side, I think there are ways of opening avenues in the future that could be for the benefit of the system overall.
I think the only problem is if Trump gets elected in the United States, the funding for emerging infectious diseases will go down the drain, I'm afraid. And I think the other problem with the closed access system that we have now is if you're in an academic institution and they purchase broad access so that you can access these journals and download articles, that's great. But if you're outside that network, and you have to pay $35 or $40 or $50 or $60 just to download one manuscript, that really hinders research, and we should really be doing the opposite.
Now, we only have 5 or so, probably 10 minutes to go, so please, there's lots of things coming through, but they're all about how angry everybody. I can feel the anger through the iPad of the reviewers not being paid, but the journals making profits. Lots of very similar comments on there. I'll come back to a couple of them, but I think we should move forward to scientific misconduct. So this paper, a couple of years old, but showed trends in retracted articles. And in fact, perhaps counterintuitive to what you might think, although there are more retractions each year, because there's so many more papers published each year, as a proportion, the number of retractions have been reducing. But the most common reason for retraction in this study, about 2/3, was scientific misconduct, and the reasons, typical kind of reasons of scientific misconduct, are listed there. So Eric, how much of a problem is this, do you think, for journals at the moment?
I think it is a problem, and certainly we have retracted. Since I became editor, we've retracted a few pieces, and we have had questions raised about others as well. It is a small minority, but I will say that it takes a disproportionate amount of our effort. It's a huge amount of work to try to figure out what's going on. And remember, we're not the police. We don't have any resources beyond whatever anyone tells us. And ultimately, the decisions on misconduct are largely left to the institutions where the research was done, who do have the power to investigate. I do want to put this in context, though, and probably, by the way, that's the reason for the plunge in retractions. It takes a long time to get to a retraction, a really long time. So there's a delay, and the more articles you have, the less time you have to put into adjudicating these issues. But why do we care about it? I mean, we care about it because we want science to be right, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But as a medical journal, I think what we're all concerned about is that, are we sending the right message? Is a patient going to be treated correctly because of something that we published? And there are lots of reasons why articles are wrong. Misconduct is a very small percentage of the reasons why our articles are wrong. So I think our job is to get the message right. And mostly we get the message wrong because of issues that were not issues of misconduct. The design was poorly, the trial was poorly designed, it was poorly executed, there were problems that were reported, there was no intention to deceive, but it's just wrong. And I think I want to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that scientific misconduct, which is only a small part of that, doesn't dominate the conversation.
If I could, one problem also investigating it is that the issues sometimes arise, as Eric alluded to, not like a couple of years later, but a decade later. And then there's a group of people going after those investigators to try to take down their entire research career. And they may be justified in doing so, but it is actually very difficult sometimes to retrace the steps that led to the acceptance of the paper, especially because, for example, I've been in my current job for 2 years. And so when someone says, oh, this paper was published in 1998 by your journal, and we think it was conducted improperly and there was no informed consent for the participants, it's a very hard task to investigate it thoroughly.
Okay, now we have exactly 5 minutes left. I want to leave 2 minutes at the end to
one
hear
quick
your
comment.
regretted article.
I'm going
30
to override
seconds.
you, because I think that what we've seen twice in the last year is people targeting other people and accusing them of scientific misconduct when there was no evidence of that. And actually going through the process to clear them is even more time consuming. So it's really, hopefully that trend won't continue.
Okay, good point. But what I quickly wanted to do, we won't have time to answer these, or there's a few burning comments, I'll say. So and I think it'd be useful just to go through those. You might want to comment on a couple of them. Quite big. So the scientific publishing world is miles away from being equitable. Most hospitals and universities from lower middle income countries or even underrepresented EU countries don't have the budget to have free access to be able to read journals. Much to be done here. The context is not the same in LMIC. I'm interested in knowing these editors' opinion on Sci-Hub. from an author's point of view, and remembering that most NLIC is the only way to get articles, so Sci-Hub, which is the subversive place to get your articles, might want to come to that. Someone else commenting, is there any justification apart from profit that open access fees at some journals seem to scale with impact factor? For example, Nature. Might not want to comment on that. How can one help those who've left academia but still want to publish? Someone pointing out that most EU and I think many other funding bodies require you to publish your results in open access, so certainly Gates and same in Australia. How is it reasonable for me to do all the work, the journals to make all the profit? Lots of those. Lots about the inequity. Okay, we're probably not going to have time to answer all these, but those are the kind of comments that are coming through. So we've got a few minutes left. So I think it's time to hear. We'll finish off with just hearing about the article which you now regret having accepted. So Ines, we'll start with you.
Well, we all regret, we realized, and there's several articles that we regret. But seriously, looking into what I would regret most is, in hindsight, is where we published articles that I would consider from my perspective now as helicopter research, where those who collected the data, curated the data, weren't really involved and weren't even invited to be part of the analysis. That's for my part.
Does the word ivermectin mean anything to you? Let's just say the paper was retracted because it was based on fraudulent data. That was the problem. The investigator who published the paper did not know the data were fraudulent. And then when he found out a day or two after the press release on the fraudulent data, and to his credit came forward and said, I have to retract this paper because it's based on these terrible data. And anyway, I was hoping we would make a big splash, and we did, not for the reason intended.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I'm not going to comment, so I won't embarrass someone in the audience.
Yes. Now we're all worried, right?
We published a paper, a very large observational study at the beginning of COVID, in the same issue as two other studies which showed that angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors weren't bad in COVID patients. And we felt okay about it because we published 3 at once, and there was no response until about a month later, The Lancet published a study from the same database that said that chloroquine didn't work. Now, there were a few chloroquine partisans out there who looked very carefully at the paper, and we thought we'd looked carefully, but in fact, it was impossible that those data existed. There were more people in the database than had COVID at the time. So we did retract that one. It's one of several articles I regret, but it's probably the biggest one.
Excellent. Well, Ines, Paul, Steve, Eric, my thanks. Thank you for being such good sports and contributing. Please join me in thanking our speakers.